Hi, my name is Becca Lane, and this is my next video in the series Lessons from the Schoolhouse. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my process for creating a circle time to use in my early childhood classroom. I will walk you through step by step what I do from start to finish to plan and create circle time. I will give you details and examples along the way so you can walk away from this video with a better idea of how to create a circle time if you are looking to do so. Circle time is such a lovely part of our day together, but for many teachers and parents, it can feel like a daunting task to know how to create one yourself to bring to your children or your program. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to share with you my steps from start to finish, and I think they will help you to be able to create a circle time yourself. So let's jump right in. I have 6 steps to creating a circle time. I'm going to briefly walk you through those 6 steps, and then we are going to go back and talk about them in detail. So the first step is to create your shell and outline of your songs. So what I mean by that is you need to figure out the outside of your circle time, what's holding it together, your opening verse and your closing verse, whether or not you want to have a song to bring them into the circle and a song to carry them to their next activity. And then you need to choose the basic songs and poems that you want to fill the inside of your circle with. And then step 2 is to consider the flow, to consider what is leading up to circle time in your day and what happens after circle time, and to be mindful when you're choosing your songs and your poems that you balance things that have high outward energy with things that are quieter and calmer. The third step is to learn the songs and poems. You will need to familiarize yourself with the feelings of the songs and the poems themselves, the individual stories that they're trying to tell, so you can bring that to the children in the way that you sing and speak and move. And that brings us to the 4th step. Add the motions and the movements. So now that you know the songs and the poems that you're going to use, you get to add motions and movements to those. During this step, you'll need to make sure, again, that you're balancing those big outward movements with the smaller inward movements. That you're balancing gross motor activities with fine motor activities. Then the 5th step is to practice it all together. And the 6th step is to bring it to the children. So now let's go back to step 1, and I'm going to share with you some more details of each step. So step 1 is to create the shell, to create the outline of your circle time. I want you to be particularly mindful of your opening verse and your closing verse. And I teach in an early childhood classroom. And with young children, I highly encourage you to keep your opening verse and your closing verse the same. I used the same ones for over a decade in my classroom. Some children were with me for 2, 3, or 4 years, and they heard the same opening and closing verse to circle time every single day. Also consider what is happening before circle time and what is happening after circle time. In my program, the children were engaged in free play before we had circle time. So I would sing a song that became a cue to them that it was time to stop playing and time to come to the circle time carpet so that we could sing together. And that song that called them to circle was the same every day. And at the end of our circle time, we would go inside to wash our hands and prep our meal. So I would sing about that at the end of circle time, after our closing verse. And that would help to lead the children to the next activity in our day. So when I'm planning step 1 of circle time, I write down that opening verse and that closing verse. They're sort of like the bookends to my circle. I come up with a song to bring them to circle and a song to bring them away. And then I decide what I want to go in the inside of my circle. That's the part that changes. And I plan 1 circle a season. So I write down on my piece of paper all of the songs and the poems and the verses that I want to include in my circle. And then I'm done with step 1. Step 2 is to consider the flow. Your circle time itself should feel like a journey for the children, like a story. The songs and the poems should have a connection from one to the other. And so I want you to think about that once you have everything written down. And to consider that you are going to want to balance big outward energy with a smaller, quieter energy. And then you get to move to step 3, which is to learn these songs and poems, to familiarize yourself with their specific mood and energy and story, because the next thing you're going to do is add motions to these songs. And I write down things on note cards often and carry them with me throughout my day so I can pull them out and practice them, practice memorizing those poems. And it's okay if you need to walk into your first circle time with a little note card with some reminders of the order of your circle or some verses sometimes you forget. But make it your intention to learn them as best you can, to memorize them if possible. And then the next step, step 4, is to add the motions and the movements. We want to balance gross motor movements like hopping and jumping and skipping with fine motor movements like finger plays and smaller, more specific movements. And again, make sure that you are not doing too much of that outward energy and not enough of the inward, or vice versa. And you need to memorize these movements yourself. Practice them with the songs and the poems until you are doing the right movements every time. You want your movements to be intentional and clear and repeated. So make sure that when you are moving like a bird, that it is clear, that you are moving like a bird. The children know what's happening. Because if you're doing something little like this, even though you may know that you're being a bird, it has a very different feeling from a clear, intentional movement. The next step, step 5, is to practice it all together. So now you get to take the poems and songs you've learned and the motions and put them together and move about your classroom or your house like you will with the children. And really practice it until you know it yourself. And then when you feel confident, when you know the words mostly, it's time to bring it to the children. And there's a couple things I'd like to share with you about this. When I write out my seasonal circle time, I mentioned I do 1 a season. It's quite long. I have that opening verse and the closing verse and all these songs and poems in the middle. But I don't bring it to the children that way. I bring it to them slowly. So we start with just 1 verse from every song or poem. And maybe I'll repeat that 1 verse 2, 3 times during the first circle time. And then as the weeks go by, we will add verses to each song and poem. So by the end of the season, our circle time is quite long. whereas at the beginning of the season, it may be shorter. All right, I hope this makes sense to you. And I hope I've given you a format and a plan that you can follow to create a circle time. Create the shell or the outline. Consider the flow. Learn the songs and the poems. Add movements. Practice it all together. And then the best step of all, bring it to the children and have fun. Please reach out if you have any questions about this. I would love to hear how it goes for you. All right, friends, be well. I'll see you next time.